Thank you. Yeah, well, any teachers in the audience? See, teachers are my people. So, you know, I did 10 years at Microsoft, 20 years in the classroom, and, you know, I'm a primary school teacher at heart. Once a primary school teacher, always a primary school teacher. And what I'm interested in, listening to all the conversations going on this week, is, when I was thought about this, is you know, playful learning, digital tech in the classroom, games in the classroom. Thinking about what my dad would say. Shouldn't you be learning? Shouldn't you be, you know, what are you doing playing games in the classroom? And I think that, you know, that's a common perception, not just of parents, but of teachers and of institutions. That sometimes I think some of the stuff that is great that kids do and is available to kids in their home lives, in their social lives, is just seen as playing. And I thought I'd just sort of share some ideas with you. Do you remember Second Life? Do you remember how it was going to revolutionize education, the world we live in? We're going to stop meeting like this, and we're all going to meet in Second Life. Yeah? It was going to transform everything. And I tried to look for a photograph about Second Life, and this was probably the most appropriate one I could show. There are things going on in Second Life that are just not appropriate. You know, it was just, there's young children here, but it's just full of nudity and inappropriate stuff. You know, I can see the audiences that have adopted that. I'm just worried, maybe, let's hope VR and AR doesn't go the same way. But it's interesting how that came on the scene and then disappeared. And what we're left with is these are some of the sort of things that I've heard, sort of games in the curriculum, you know, gaming in the curriculum, playful learning, learning through technology, digital learning, virtual learning, and we've got hundreds of names for this. But for me as a primary school teacher, it's learning. Kids learn through play. Right? Games are part of playing. Kids will invent their own games. Have you ever seen a kid playing that isn't happy? You know, we're in a situation in schools now where we're talking about kids being stressed and receiving counselling in school. They can face all that when they're adults. Let them worry about that. And it's because I think we're getting to a point with learning now that is, when I was in school, we had 2 years where that was where you got your head down, you went through this process called the examination system, and you came out rubber-stamped with your GCSEs, and bang, 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 there's your quality assurance, and out you pop. That has crept down and down and down to 6-year-olds who are almost in that systematic process of let's start feeding them through a manufacturing process of applying a set of skills that somebody has decided will measure them against that. And we were having a conversation this morning in HE about having a skills agenda. And one of the things I was thinking of, the reason people want skills is because you can tick them off when they've been achieved, and then they can measure your performance as an institution against that. It's nothing to do with the kid or the child or the person and their learning and where you want them to go. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So whatever we're talking about, it's about learning. And kids learn, we learn as adults through play. That's the way I think about it. Learning is play. In Welsh, the word for learning is dysgu. The word for teach is dysgu. The words are the same. And it's not new. This, you know, we're at this sort of digital event, and we're at a point where all this new technologies are coming forward, and we're talking about putting gaming into education as though it's something that just somebody has woken up recently and thought of. We've had it for years. Gamification is one where I'm going to pick on you as your children. Yeah? In your school, when you do something well, do you get a house point or a class point? Yeah, you do. And you earn those points, and then they give awards and things like that. I had that in my school. We've always had points for winning things and so on. And there's lots of ways of gamifying learning. There was an organisation, I checked them online last night, and sadly they're no longer, but called Zondel. And Zondel was a whole system where kids could earn points, store them online, and schools were using them to give rewards, whether it was go on a trip or some sort of prize or something toward the end of school. And what was unique about Zondel was they would allow kids to gamble their points. So if you answered a question right, a maths question, 3 9s, ask him. Right? Now I could say, right, I'll give you 2 house points for that. All right? or you can have 6 house points or nothing based on the roll of a dice. And they were finding that kids would gamble to try and get more, and they weren't bothered about losing the points because they knew they could get more. But equally, teachers would say, well, that's not fair. They've lost the points. But they're not. Your job isn't as a teacher isn't give them points. It's to get them to learn. And if that encourages them to learn and answer a question, then you've done your job. The gamification part of it is the enjoyment of the child. Yeah. So if you want to, thinking of if you're creating games, maybe you have an element of opportunity, of gambling. I won't say gambling, we want to use a different word, but taking a chance. So getting success and achievements in the games, kids seem to enjoy taking that little bit of risk. PowerPoint is my beloved thing. I love PowerPoint. Yeah, I would maybe from Microsoft, but it's one of my favorite things. We can make quizzes in PowerPoint now. Kids can make their own content in PowerPoint and make their own quizzes. Teachers have said, well, can I get them to use that to test? And into that word comes in test. I say, well, if you stop calling them tests and start calling them quizzes, maybe kids will be more engaged with it. And if a kid makes their own quiz, then they've got to go and do the learning to get the answers right, to provide the quiz for a different audience. So another idea is kids making their own content in a gamification way. Giving points. We've got a piece. I would say I'm no longer with Microsoft. It's going to take me ages to get out of that now. OneNote, for example, is a piece of software where you could add, kids can appoint stars to different pieces of the teacher's work. So I would give my kids a piece of work, and if the kids liked it, they gave me a star. That was my feedback, and I could collect those number of stars up and actually find out which pieces of work that kids liked me to give them. So gamification is really simple to do. But what we do in schools, and I'll get to this point at the end, is we end up going, I'll use this to enhance my manufacturing system of churning out these kids. So instead of the quiz being about anything the child wants to make a quiz on, it becomes a test at the end of the week. And I was working with some children on some coding activities, and this girl said, I wish this could be like my maths. I said, what do you mean? She said, well, in coding, I can make something. If it doesn't work, I can try it again and do it again and again until I fix it or find it or make it work. Wish I could do that with my maths. So instead of just getting 5 out of 10, I was thinking, why do we do that? Why do we say to kids, right, here's your maths test at the end of the week, they get 5 out of 10, and they never go back to see what's wrong? Why don't we let them just keep going until they get 10 out of 10? Does it matter? And it's about, we end up focusing on that system. Quizzes. I keep looking at this machine. It's from the other one was games-based learning. A good friend of mine, Ollie Bray, based at Canusi in the north of Scotland here, he developed this project through Learning Scotland at the time. Do you know what game it is? Guitar Hero, yeah? And what he did was they put Xboxes in schools. Those kids had one Xbox, they had the game, they played the game, but also they had to design their own guitars, their own rock bands, they had to organize tours, they had to develop merchandise. So they played the game very briefly, that was the inspiration. But the amount of work that was based around it across the curriculum was phenomenal. When all those kids in year 6 then went to the senior school, the high school, they had to disband their original rock bands and create new ones because they were all joining forces together and work with different kids. Really interesting way of just using the game. Yeah? And, if I'd shown this to teachers, they would go, oh, well, that's not teaching music, is it? Nothing to do with music. And also, I've often shown this to teachers. They say, oh, it's a game, it's not proper learning, is it? But if this was a book, and we were doing a literacy topic around, a classic, some Shakespearean classic, or if it was a film or something like that, people would look at it and go, oh, that's great. But because it's a game, there's that bit of snobbery that it's not proper learning. I often believe that if a great teacher can make watching paint dry learning, so if you've got the stimulation and involvement from the kids here, then you're going to get them engaged. And that's what they found. They found kids who weren't normally engaged, really engaged, and come into the forefront. And the stuff they were set was really challenging.
Kodu is whatever you want it to be.
It just all depends on the person.
You start with what you want the game to be about.
You can create the full game itself.
You're gonna see the art behind video games.
Kids are learning how to program and make video games.
Actually making something instead of just playing it.
I'm loving it.
This is Kodu. I used to work with this. I'm not a coder, I'm not a programmer, I'm not really a gamer. But as a primary school teacher, how do I introduce that into schools? So making games is really important. And this is a piece of software called Kodu, free. It's been around for nearly 6-7 years. Nobody knows it's out there. You can try it this month now with a big learning company. But it can build Xbox quality games, using Xbox controllers. Now, when I show this to proper programmers, it's not proper programming because it's all tile-based, and you just click and drag and you pull bits over. It's not proper programming. They should be using something like Scratch or Python. Well, I'm not interested in learning that. I want them to develop a game. I want them to understand the interactions with games. And when we ran this as a project, we had 1 million kids over 3 years using this, and it wasn't, they had to build the game, then they had to sell it. They had to develop an enterprise around it. And these were kids of 7, 8, and 9 years old doing this. And you will be amazed. We had the program up to 14. We had a group of girls, won it from the Welsh Valleys, and they presented their work to the head of Lionhead Studios, and he said if they were 4 years old, that he would have employed them. Their business plan was so sound. That's what these kids are doing, and they're coming for you. They're coming for your jobs and your space. Then you've got all this other stuff that goes alongside this, being a YouTuber. And, you know, it's like, I can create a film, I can put it on. It's not an aspiration. These kids are doing it all the time. Have you two got YouTube channels? Yeah? Have you got a YouTube channel? Do you put your own things on YouTube? No? Do you put your things? No? Got to get yourself a YouTube channel. Met a boy yesterday. Yeah? What's his name? Fuzzy Fuzz 21. Look him up on YouTube. Makes his own YouTube channel. And I said, how do you do it? He says he takes a Sony Handycam, films the television, because he hasn't worked out how to do it on his Xbox yet. His mum has to stay out of the room because it's all silent. He sets up a whole studio, films it, downloads it, edits it on the film, bangs it up to YouTube. He's got 5 subscribers. Right? I've got 6 because I've subscribed to it. What drives kids to want to do that? We were just talking about to David. They're not worried about it. Whatever they've done is a sense of achievement, and they want to share it. And they've got the technology in their hands to do it. And I find this something that schools are just not doing. You know, as a teacher, I would want to get in here with the kids and help them script it, understand audience. All these things we're being asked to teach the kids in literacy, for example. This is Solly.
Hello, this is Solly the Kid, and this is my first ever Minecraft video. This is what I'll be starting my videos in about in like my 5th or 6th video. We might want to head inside Witchy now because I just heard one bit of thunder. But first I just want to see. So this is called, the boat's called the actual Pretty Tide. Built by me and my family. I am only 6, so this makes sense.
I am only 6.
Okay, into the clue stick. So here we got the restaurant water fun. We got a nice little wave here.
I met him at Minecon. He came up to me and gave me his business card. He said, "Hi, I'm Solly the Kid." His sister, who was 4, said, "Yes, he is. He's my brother." Checked with Mum. And Solly's been at a couple of events. He's 8 now, so he's like almost retirement age, really. But his world is his YouTube channel. And his mum said, I do this because it gives him confidence, it allows him to do stuff. And then I look at other parents who just sort of look at it sort of with a scowl and sort of say, but if he was playing the piano, or a violinist, or a footballer, we wouldn't blink at it. But because it seems to be this YouTube, because it's Minecraft, Solly the Kid, check him out. Yeah? Coming after your job, isn't he? Yeah. And this is what I want to stop, and this is what my plea to you as people in this industry. Don't develop stuff in the amazing technology that you have that just supports this manufacturing process of us stamping out kids, churning them out, giving them 5 A stars. What's an A star? When I was in school, you got an A. Where's the A star for? I think in 10 years' time, we'll have A triple stars. And I don't know. We're just churning them out. Yeah? And there's a danger that publishing companies are going to come to you and say, will you build this in VR for us? And you'll go, yes, and you'll take the money. Fantastic, great for you. But all you're doing is recreating the textbook that they delivered as a textbook, then they turned it into a CD-ROM, then they turned it into a subscription-based website, and now they're trying to put it into a new piece of technology. The same stuff all over again. I would urge you, and I don't know what it is that it's got to be different. How many of you have got, any of you got gaming studio companies here? How many of you have got kids on your board? And I don't mean 16, 17-year-olds, I mean 7, 8-year-olds like Solly. Because they're your customers. Yeah? Think about it. You haven't got to pay them a lot. Yeah? Sadly, last week, we lost one of the greatest advocates of games-based learning in the world we've ever had. This is Seymour Papert. And he created a computer language called Logo, which to me is a language to allow kids to program play, if you like. Yeah? He first got me inspired about using programming as an educational tool, not because I want to learn about computer science. And that's the statement I want to leave for you, and to drive what you develop in the field of education. Thanks very much. So now can I introduce David? David?
Yeah. Thanks very much. Okay. This thing on? Can everybody hear me? Okay, so my name is David Whelan. I'm from a company based in Ireland, Immersive VR Education, and we work in virtual reality. So what I want to talk about today is why use virtual reality for education, and a little bit about what we create. So I'm going to talk briefly about Apollo 11, which is our virtual reality documentary, which recreates the full mission. You get to become Neil Armstrong and get to travel to the moon. And then I'm going to talk briefly about our education platform, which we hope will transform distance learning. So I'm just going to play a short little video first.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Okay, so that was a short trailer of our Apollo 11 experience. We released it on the Oculus Rift and the HTC Vive on April 1st. And since it's been released, it's been in the top 10 selling VR experiences globally. And people often ask me, why choose Apollo 11, especially being from Ireland? And as we are an educational company, we wanted to choose a subject that was not war or famine or death. And if you open any history book in the world, most of the stories, 99% of them, are all about wars or famine or death. Whereas the one story that is taught globally is Apollo 11, and it was a real inspirational time in human history. Also as well, I'm a massive space fan. When I was a kid, I did want to be Neil Armstrong. So I think if you ask most 10-year-olds, what they want to be when they grow up, a lot of them will say astronauts or firemen or say rocket scientists. So why use virtual reality? So often, I don't know if you've gone to many talks about virtual reality, you'll always hear people talk about scale, movement, and especially the word presence. So when you're in virtual reality, scale, objects look to scale. So we have a scene inside the Apollo 11 experience where you're dropping from 400 feet down onto the platform. And if you're afraid of heights, you will be afraid of this scene, because when you look down, your stomach will churn because it really feels like you're dropping to the floor. And that spacecraft there, the launch vehicle, was 365 feet tall. So when you land on the platform, you're looking up, and it does look 365 feet tall. This is something that can only be experienced in VR, can't be experienced in any other medium. As well, in virtual reality, you get a sense of movement. So often when you hear people talk about virtual reality, a lot of people say, "Ooh, I felt a little bit sick." And the reason they feel a little bit sick is because it really feels like you're moving inside virtual reality. And this is the opposite to motion sickness. So in motion sickness, if you're on a boat and you can't see outside, kind of like in a room similar to here, and the boat is moving, your inner ear, the fluid in your inner ear is moving. So there's a disconnect from what you're looking at, looks totally stable, but your inner ear knows it's moving, so you feel a little bit ill. Virtual reality is the opposite way around, whereas when you're inside a virtual reality headset, your eyes, everything that you can see makes you believe you're moving, yet your inner ear knows it's not moving. So there's a bit of a disconnect. So it's the opposite, but you do get a tolerance. We actually use it to great effect inside the Apollo 11 experience. We have a section called the TLI burn, and I wanted to make people feel like they were weightless. So what we do is we tumble the user over the spacecraft, and we change the direction of the horizon so they feel weightless for about 15 seconds. And we feel people have a tolerance for 15, 20 seconds of this type of movement inside a VR experience. And then finally, presence. Presence is the big, big buzzword that people use when talking about virtual reality. So this is the feeling of being at a real location. This is Star Trek, obviously, so they had the holodeck. So when they walked onto the holodeck, they felt like they were at a real location. If you haven't tried virtual reality, when you put on a headset, it really makes you feel like you are at a different location. You don't feel like you're in the room. So the design philosophy of Apollo 11 is we wanted to make sure it was accessible to everyone, young and old. So we wanted to create an experience that could be shared. So a lot of people who are buying these headsets are gamers, but often when gamers buy these new pieces of technology, they want to show it off, and they want to show it off to their parents. So a lot of people's parents would have been kids themselves during the Apollo 11 missions, and we thought that this would have been a great experience for them to share. So, and obviously we wanted to make it inspirational for kids. So the first steps in designing it, I'm going to skip through this because I actually thought I had an hour to talk, but I'm going to squeeze it into 15 minutes. Some of my inspirations for designing the Apollo 11 experience. Obviously, 2001 Space Odyssey was a big influence. The Apollo 13 movie, so if you watch the Apollo 13 movie and then try our experience, you'll actually see 2 or 3 scenes that nearly exactly replicate what happened in that movie. And Pink Floyd, I'm a big Pink Floyd fan, and the way I've designed the experience, it's a long-form experience. So when you're doing the non-interactive version, it's 45 minutes long, and it's all set to music. And the reason it's set to music is we're trying to create an emotional experience. So if you have an emotional impact on your subject or your students, that will resonate with them and that will stick with them. So everybody here can remember where they were when they had their first kiss because you had such an emotional impact on you. We're trying to achieve the same with the experiences that we're building. Okay. So then I just got a list of the scenes required. It was quite easy because I just followed the full mission for Apollo 11, but we did want to add we choose to go to the moon speech from JFK at the very beginning. Then we'd done our research, we got as many photographs as we possibly could, and then we recreated the spacecraft. So when you're inside the spacecraft in the Apollo 11 experience, every switch and every dial is exactly accurate. When you're looking at the moon, for example, it's the real moon you're looking at because we took all the NASA data that they gathered. They created a photo mosaic of the landing site before Neil landed on the moon. So when you're looking outside the window in the lander and you're looking down on the moon, every crater and every valley you see is exactly the same from the point of view that Neil had back 47 years ago. So as I was saying, music equals emotion. So music has been used to instill emotion in people for hundreds of years. So we use it very, well, I hope very effectively in the Apollo experience. So I'm actually just going to skip this bit, okay? And I just show this video, so if you have turn the audio there, please. So what you can hear, it's the real audio from the event. So we have the real cockpit audio, voice recording, and we blend it with music.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
This video was captured from me inside the VR headset looking around. Okay, so using virtual reality, you can use a system called triggered events, what we call it triggered events. So because it's virtual reality, you have no control where the person is looking at that particular time. So what you can create are triggered events. So what we do is if the user looks in a certain position at a certain time, something will happen. In this case, the astronaut sitting next to him will give him the thumbs up, and that astronaut gave him the thumbs back. This is Charlie Duke. He's the youngest man ever to walk on the moon, and he was also on Capcom for Apollo 11. We had the opportunity to meet him in Brussels some months back, and he was absolutely delighted with the experience that he received. We also have timed events. So in virtual reality, because we can't take control of where the person looks, we have these timed events. So during their experience, because we're placing them within a scene, we have events that happen. So in this particular case, we have the Earthrise come from behind the moon. So we don't force the player to look in the direction to see the Earthrise. We just hope that naturally they will pan over and they will see the Earthrise come from behind the moon. And when they do that in a natural way, it has much more of an impact instead of if you were, say, doing a standard documentary where you're cutting from scene to scene to scene and forcing the person to see what you want them to see. This is a more natural way. And then finally, when you mix all of these elements together with the audio and the actual images of the moon and the authenticity of the experience, you get this type of reaction.
It's the coolest thing ever, dude. Wow.
It gets better.
It's like I'm there, buddy.
It gets better.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
This is by far probably, this is my go-to Rift thing when I want to show people what the Rift is about, because this is what it does. It makes it's incredible.
It's
Bottom
unbelievable. It is so unbelievable, buddy.
Are you okay?
Yeah.
Are you crying?
Yeah.
Oh,
I'll
wow.
never get to do this, but here, this is incredible.
Oh God.
Okay, so it's so difficult to describe, to show this on a flat screen. It is really something that you have to try experience for yourselves. So the reason why we built Apollo 11, it's really to educate people that virtual reality is a useful tool for education. So we're building a virtual reality university where you as an educator can be anywhere in the world and teach anybody any subject in a virtual classroom. Kind of similar to Second Life, but in virtual reality. But what we're trying to achieve is, why even teach class in a classroom? So if you're teaching marine biology, why not teach that on the seabed and have a whale swim through the center of the class? And we're trying to empower educators. They can create their own lessons or their own classes, or even students can create their own classes and share these experiences and learn together. What follows is just kind of the Apollo 11 experience has won quite a few awards, international awards, and what follows after that is just a brief description of the education platform.
And the winner is Apollo 11 by Immersive VR Education. So we'll take a picture with your award first this time. Here we go.
Thank you.
There we go. Okay.
Thanks very much. A great man once said that education is the most powerful weapon with which we can change the world. And I believe that VR and AR technology is the most powerful medium with which we can provide immersive educational experiences. Apollo 11 is the most important mission that mankind has ever embarked on, and now for the first time you can truly experience it through the eyes of those who lived through it. I'm very, very honoured to win this award, especially coming from a very, very small town in Ireland. It is my hope, no, it is my belief that there is a child today, somewhere alive on this planet, who's eventually going to set foot upon Mars. And I really, really hope that they get to experience VR in school and that they get to experience Apollo 11, and this sets them on the path to becoming an astronaut or a scientist or an engineer that will actually eventually make the ships that will travel to Mars. Finally, I'd like to thank my amazing team. Drash, he's an amazing developer to work with. Nick Pidham, who's our animator. Mario Matavani, who is our model maker. And of course, Sandra, who's our voiceover artist. Thanks very much. Okay, so this is just a little bit about the platform.
Welcome to Lecture VR Public Alpha 0.1. Lecture VR is a tool that allows users to hold meetings, professors to hold classes, and content creators to create immersive experiences. Think of us as a type of networked virtual reality PowerPoint with immersive environments, simulated objects, and interactive tools that will make educational content fun and intuitive. This early alpha release is designed to test some of the capabilities of Lecture VR and will allow you to hold your own private meetings, presentations and classes over the network, collaborate on whiteboards remotely, and load our demo lessons. Our goal is to provide a platform that educators can utilise to enhance their students' education and to provide an alternative method for distance learning programmes, giving our users a sense of being in a real location, taking part in a real class.
You have about like a foot or two behind it.
Very, very cool. Okay, try that front bit. Okay, so our next product is going to be Titanic VR, which lets you dive on the shipwreck of the Titanic, and it will also place you on the Titanic as it gets struck by an iceberg. We haven't talked about it too much yet, but that's the actual model that we're using inside virtual reality, and it's really awe-inspiring to swim around that at the bottom of the ocean. That's it. Thanks very much. I'm going to sit over here.
Yeah, David?
Hi everyone, so I'm David Farrell. I'm a lecturer at Glasgow Caledonian where I teach game design. I do a lot of research in game-based learning, serious games and that kind of area, and I think about this kind of stuff quite a lot usually.
Cool. So hi everyone, my name is Kate Ho. I run a company called Tigerface Games. Essentially we make collaborative learning games for kids between the ages of 5 to 11, and for us it's really about we kind of started when the iPad started coming out, and we kind of thought, hey, you know, out of all the things that are being put on the iPad in terms of educational games, it didn't really take advantage of the touchscreen or the multi-touch aspect of it. And so what we did was we basically, well, there's that bit of it, but then there's the second part of the fact that collaborative learning are gaining, you know, real traction inside the primary school classroom. And there weren't any, for us anyway, there weren't any games that that for the iPad market anyway, where you could kind of get 2 or more kids around the same iPad, talking and learning to each other, and we know that one of the most effective ways of teaching or learning anyway is for kids to interact together and talk together and try and explain problems and think through things. So so that's so we're Tiger Face Games, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the floor? Yes, thank you.
What would you say is the biggest problem with trying to educate kids with the games in schools? Because I did 2 months doing game design and game development in a high school in Dundee, and the biggest problem I found was that the Dundee Council set so many restrictions upon internet access, IT, and for games, and especially education, collaboration is really key in games, and that was the biggest drawback, that they were so limited, and the teacher had very little knowledge of IT, which kind of held them back. But how would you suggest changing that?
Okay, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. So for us, it's there's a whole bunch of things. So I know you mentioned about networking, and security. So that's a really big thing, right? As in, and also the equipment that the kids have in the classroom as well is a massive limiting factor for us. What we found was that when we were talking to teachers about iPads, they were saying, well, yeah, the school's bought 6 iPads. That's great. We could use it as a set. But actually, what am I going to do with a classroom of 30 kids and 6 iPads? What do the other kids do? And so it was, for us, it's about trying to make sure that it's as easy as possible as well for people to just, set up their equipment. So back to your question more in general, I think it's just about games isn't just about video games either. I mean, we're all part of video games, but it's really about what are playful ways in which you can get kids to interact. And the key thing about that, it's about engagement. Right, because you can't teach anyone anything without engaging them, right? Can you? Yeah. So it's about. So it's just okay. So it's really difficult because there are lots of limitations on teachers and IT systems, but I think that there are lots of creative ways around them as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a real disconnect between the councils, and they're interested in keeping kids safe, so they do that by stopping kids accessing anything. That's the easiest way to do it. For me, the secret is getting teachers to try and break this system that they're entrenched in, and it's through no fault of their own. That's what they're measured on. They're measured on the success, the quality of the product that they create at the end of the day. And where there are great schools, they're delivering great product. It sounds terrible to call it like that, but I think it's still this conveyor belt. They're delivering kids well-rounded, holistic skill sets, coming out and meeting great exam results. And we've got a disconnect by those people who, if you like, control the internet access, control funding for schools, and from teachers themselves who see all this and are at times afraid to take that risk. And it's seen as, this stuff, this amazing stuff is seen as a risk. Because if they're spending time immersing themselves in Apollo 11, now when I taught, there were 3 statements on the national curriculum in Wales that regarding Earth and space. One was to learn about the planets, one was to learn that we lived on the Earth, and there was the moon and the sun, and the other one was a year is 365 days. That's all it was. There was no mention of being an astronaut or traveling to space. But that's such a massive, rich experience. So teachers look at that. That's what they've got to teach by law. It's mandatory. And so, they'd almost they'll look at that once the tests are over. And it becomes something that is sort of added on if they're in a school that has a teacher that will give them this opportunity. That's if they're lucky. If they're really lucky, they'll have a school that embraces that sort of technology and that sort of approach and that inclusiveness. And if they've got 6 iPads, they'll work with 6 iPads.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm afraid the reality is at times that there are many schools that will just say it's not for us, and they'll come up with more excuses not to do it than to do it. And there's only one reason why you should do that, for the benefit of every child in the education system.
If I might add some stuff to it. So I think there's lots of problems with using games in schools, and some of them are the practical elements like discussed here. But I'd like to push back against the idea that we don't need curriculum, or curricula rather. So at primary school, that's perhaps what the standard was, but it's not like they were never going to learn about Apollo. Maybe it was at a later year. So maybe at high school is when they bring in the Apollo game. Maybe there's a different game to be brought in at a younger age. And so if you start to think about how Apollo, I played Apollo, I loved it by the way, right? I liked it a lot. But you imagine bring that into a classroom. What are they going to learn from it? Are they going to learn about the role of the political aspect of the space race and how the amount of money spent was part of the way America won that Cold War? Are they going to learn about the effect of gravity? You can't jump so much in the Apollo game, right? There's a lot of things that you get from that experience. I really liked it. But you need something else beyond that. So the kinds of things that I think about regarding problems of using games in a classroom, I don't care about the practical things. People figure those out, and people do figure them out until they cancelled the program. Constellarium with Ollie and Derek Robertson was amazing. And the Rock Band stuff's amazing. But why did the Rock Band stuff work? It worked because of teachers. Teachers will take the contextual hub, that's Ollie's phrase for using Rock Band in that way, and they'll build actual lessons that map onto a curriculum that will help those people get an experience of economics. They look at the ticket sales and how much they need to earn. They look at the art of the poster design, and it takes a human being like a teacher to evaluate the poster. So in that context, the game added something, but it didn't have to do all the heavy lifting. So I think I think there are no easy answers actually.
No.
And I think that we have games is not a solution. Games is an approach. We don't talk about book-based education. Why do we talk about game-based education? It should be a solution for a problem. So sometimes you want a game that will actually teach the facts. Sometimes you want a game that will give you an exciting context for which to build a series of lessons. And sometimes you want to create a game that makes you actually do something different. And just because I'm on a rant here, the comment about gamification being easy, it is easy to do a terrible job. This gambling thing is a terrible idea, right? Why do house points work? They work because there's a sense of pride in your house, and the game design, i.e. do good things and get points, supports the overall trajectory of the point of having the game in there. If you can gamble them away, it subverts the actual idea that we're working together to build on something great. So you need good game designers to create good games. And I just think everything is way, 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 way harder than everybody else thinks it is.
I agree. I mean, for me, the gambling idea, it just shows how kids think about what they've been given that we as adults think is a reward. To me, it shows, it's emphasizing the point of we're thinking like adults.
Sure. But a lot of adults get broke through gambling.
Gambling's probably not the wrong word, but what I'm saying is it's about kids taking a risk and trying to do, I mean, that's just the research that they found.
Sure.
And it's a strange element, like you said, the problem, there's no easy answer. And what I'm trying to get at is, as adults, I think it's, going back to what Papa was saying, it's very difficult for us to think like adults, think like children. We've sort of, maybe those neurons have disappeared a long time ago, but when we do capture that, we talked about Minecraft earlier on, how has that been embraced? And the people that own Minecraft are the kids. And again, I think going back to your point about it's the teachers who are key. The Guitar Hero thing, Ollie did 10 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's still one of the best examples.
It's one of the best examples. Why isn't it in the national curriculum? Yeah, and when I think you're right, the curriculums are written, and there are teachers that do great stuff. But there's my feeling is we're seeing more and more teachers who aren't doing. I work in schools where the kids do not do any artwork until they've sat the tests. Their last year of primary school, every day, maths, literacy, until May.
Yeah, I think standardized testing and a heavy emphasis on ticking boxes is obviously a nightmare.
Yeah.
But I think there's a value in having a well-rounded understanding of facts and skills and procedures as well.
Yeah, I agree, but I think that the facts and the skills are an easy way, and where you've got great teachers and great learning is where they can take anything, and there are lots of great teachers out there, don't get me wrong, and I work with many of them and deliver, but I always feel as though those teachers are swimming against the tide.
I think.
But
sorry. I was just going to say, I think great teachers, they don't teach kids how to pass a test. They teach kids how to ask why. And this is one of the reasons why we built Apollo 11 and why we're building the platform, is when a student goes into Apollo 11 and experiences what it was like to be an astronaut back in the 60s, when they come, like, we don't teach them all the facts, and we did take some artistic license to inspire the kids a bit more. But when they come out of that, if they start asking questions, why did we go to the moon? Who is Neil? Who else went to the moon? Why did the human race decide to go in the 60s? Why haven't we gone back? Why haven't we gone to Mars? These are the kind of questions that we're trying to instill in students. So as I said, like, we feel like all this technology is great, but it's just a tool. All this gamification is just a tool. You have to teach your kids to ask why, and ask why all their lives, because we're always learning. I am 36 years old now. I'm still learning day to day. You know, so you're always a student. Don't just think when you're in school you're a student. You're always a student for the rest of your life, and if you can teach that to your kids, you're doing a really good job.
I was going to say also, for all the chat about and focus around teachers, also parents have a massive responsibility as well. I think sometimes we just kind of outsource the job of teaching to teachers, and they're only half of the problem. Not half the problem, half the solution. Sorry, I didn't mean it like that. As in a part, they're only part of the picture. So, for instance, one of the things is when we were building our games, we took it into a classroom, and we really focus on teachers. But actually, one of the biggest things that we found was that parents would come up to us and say, "Hey, I've got, my son's 8. He's kind of struggling at school with sums, and I don't know how to work with him without it looking like a chore. Like, we're gonna have to sit and do math sheets again." So it was like having that iPad game just made it so much easier to say, well, okay, let's just play a game together. And suddenly it just changes the context and makes it so much more engaging, yeah. So that's what I would add.
Question there, thanks.
Hi there, thanks. Really interesting discussion today. I'm trying to get into the game of gaming, and a question is really for David and the whole panel, in that could you amalgamate the whole VR, AR, so it becomes taking that VR singular experience that the kid or anybody gets, but bringing it into the AR augmented reality where the individual teams or kids could be put out to bring together, sort of finished blocks that then take the story further forward, so that way they're each getting ownership of the storyline. So some have to learn about the rocket fuel, some have to, maybe learn about why they're going on the mission. Some have to learn about the processes to building the rocket. Some have to learn about blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And then that way, everyone brings it together, and it allows the teacher, through sharing on a screen, to actually take them, through the journey.
Yeah, we're actually, we've prototyped our Mars mission, where we do have somebody who does guidance, somebody else that does fuel management, another person then that actually plots, say, the distances between the planets to make sure that they launch at exactly the right time. So exactly what you're saying is what we're prototyping in the Lecture VR platform, because it is a fully multiplayer user experience. Now, you don't need virtual reality to use that system. It can work on a standard desktop display. But augmented reality, for people who don't know, it's virtual reality is where everything you can see and hear is all virtual, and augmented reality is when you can still see the real world, but yet you can have all these digital objects placed in the real world. Pokemon Go is probably the most popular example of AR at the moment. So this type of technology is being used. Microsoft are also developing the HoloLens. You've probably tried it. You've not tried the HoloLens? Oh, right. But the HoloLens, it's a helmet, augmented reality helmet that you put on you, and you can have an object, digital object, in the centre of the room, and everybody can be wearing these. They're like Google glasses, and they can all see the same digital object and interact with that. So all this technology is definitely coming into the education space.
in the next few years. But at the moment, VR is the only affordable headset display at the moment, but AR and VR are two sides of the same coin. Yeah. Anybody else? Question?
No?
I'll just tag on into that because, hey, this is what I'm doing, I guess, today. I just would like to say, like, technology is cool and sexy and exciting, but so what, you know? So, like, we learn by having a standard base of knowledge, having an experience that conflicts with what we already know, and then that's how we make new knowledge. So all that technology stuff only matters if the experience itself gives you the opportunity to learn something new. So I just want to, like, anybody that's ever making anything for any educational purpose, whether it's a game or anything, has to focus on what do they know, what do you want them to know, and what kind of living experience is going to do that. Technology can be a total distraction. All these schools that bought iPads are now stuck with 6-year-old iPads that can't connect to the App Store. But the book still works, you know. I love games and I make educational games, but you've got to know why you're doing it. You can't just, you know, build stuff for the sake of building it if you actually want it to be effective. It's always got to start from who's the human being, where are they now, where do you want them to get to, and, you know, not just build it with technology just for the sake of it, you know. Like the example you were suggesting there with all this stuff, you could do all of that stuff, you know, building in cardboard and then having the teacher slot it together. It would give the same learning experience. It wouldn't be as cool. And of course, there's a little bit of motivational affordance we get from playing with cool stuff. I love playing with cool stuff. It makes me excited. It makes, you know, young people excited too. But if you want them to learn a thing, then they've got to be able to learn the thing, you know. So I just wanted we all have to remember that. I forget it all the time, and I get excited about cool stuff for cool stuff's sake. But it's got to be about taking you from here to here somehow, you know.
Yeah, but then so I agree, but I think there's two bits to it, which is one is about the domain, so things that you're trying to teach, and then the other part is about the actual skill itself, in terms of the actual technology. So for instance, I was playing with the BBC microbit the other day, and I was thinking back, you know, we used to, back in the day, had this like CAD program on the BBC, and it was just like, it didn't do much more than go, you know, you can't program that, but it kind of gave me the skill to then want to learn about computing and go on to do a computer science degree. So there's something about there's the domain of what you want to teach, but also that we mustn't forget that unless there is an apocalyptic world, which you know, maybe that anyway. Let's not go there. There will not be a future where there's less technology than there is now.
Yeah. I think with technology as well, with VR and AR, it really instills empathy in users. So there's some apps out there, very powerful apps that the Times magazine created, where you're in a refugee camp, and that feeling of being in the center of that refugee camp really gives you a sense of empathy that you can't get from reading a book or a newspaper article. And these are the types of experiences that our kids are going to have in schools when they're learning about history. With Apollo 11 as well, we often get people who tear up inside. You've seen an example video there. They get very emotional because this is something they've dreamt about for many, many years. Whereas when they read about it in a history book of what it's like to look at the Earth, it just doesn't have the same impact. So this is what technology is very useful for. Books are fantastic for some subjects, but they don't work for everybody. I'm a very, very visual person, and I could read a book about how to assemble a car engine, or I can do it in virtual reality and actually pick up the physical pieces and put it together in a digital way. And in my mind, it's sitting with me a lot better than just looking at photographs of these car parts and trying to put them together. Like, our company tagline is learn through experience. So it's like, if I wanted to ride a bike, I could read all the books that I want all about how to ride a bike, but until I sit on top of a bike, I don't fully understand how to do it. And this type of technology allows you to experience stuff that you would not normally be able to experience in your lifetime.
Okay. So I think we're getting the cue from that time. So I hope that's given you a lot to think about as you make your way around the rest of the festival. One more question.
It's from me, Stuart. It's about refresh rates, really. It's listening to everything that's been said here. You've got two things which are sort of happening simultaneously. One is the education system, and a sector which has perhaps a slow refresh rate in terms of how quickly it can readjust to requirements. And you've got then the education, the technology sector, where it's accelerating, if anything. How do you find the compatible sort of space between those two things, which can be in conflict, and who actually makes the decision about it? How do you calibrate that conversation? Who gets to decide at which rate you bring in technology and how quickly you can change the curriculum, for instance?
Mark, I wish I knew, because if I did, I wouldn't tell you. I'd be out there selling that answer now. I think there's sort of a Venn diagram, an intersection between the two. But I think there's needs to be. I think David, you mentioned the word empathy. I think the education, organisations and environment and sector needs an empathy with the digital side, and vice versa. I think the education side doesn't really understand what this technology. I mean, the things you were mentioning about were like on an emotional level. A lot of schools won't see that. At that point, for kids who knows how. Do you know, I would have seen a group of kids using that and their first reaction, because they don't know. Going to the moon, I remember that, but that's history now, and that makes me feel very old. But equally, tech companies and the experience of education they have is their own education. So it's about trying to blend the two together, and actually have debates like we're having, and putting all that stuff into it, to actually come up with a product or a mechanism or a system that understands the both ends. And I don't think either sector can do it on its own, because I think education can get a lot from the technology, and equally technology can learn a lot from the education side. And I think it's about getting the two together and having this frank talk, because I think what we need hasn't quite. You're close. But I'm not sure if we're there yet with what it needs to look like. And we need to talk about it.
I just know with my own education, I had 9 teachers, and the only subjects that I'm really good at are the subjects that I enjoyed, because I really had a rapport with those teachers. And the classes that I would really pour on was stuff that just didn't inspire me. And I'm not saying like technology is the answer. It certainly is not. But it's a very, very, very useful tool. It's like books are fantastic, don't get me wrong, and traditional education is fantastic, but educators in general are very slow to adopt new technologies. I'm just about old enough to remember when the personal PC came out, and everybody said this is the absolute revolution in education, it's going to change everybody's lives. And the computer was out for quite a few years before it was actually adopted into computers. And even nowadays there's some schools that barely touch a computer from day to day, so this technology will take a while, but you need the educators to be educated first before they can educate the students on using these types of technology. But I think it can be very beneficial in the long run.
David, do you want to comment, final comment on that, and then Kate?
I'm okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Kate, you finished now, Mark?
Yeah, I think I'm finished, Stuart. Can I perhaps close the session and to thank all 4 members of the panel, and to show your appreciation for them. Thank you.
Discussion. Cheers. Thanks.